Thank you. Thank you. And I feel a little bit guilty coming here at 4 in the afternoon. You've been listening to some great speeches all day long. There are no windows in here. I'll give you the news. It's really nice outside. It's sunny. So I will try not to take too much time. I want to thank Bob and Roger and all of you for the enormously important work that you do year after year after year. And God knows that in this moment in American history, we need that effort, and we need to redouble that effort. I want to start off by just making a few points. Point number one, there's an election coming in November, and what the pundits tell us is that 60% of the American people are not going to participate in that election. As I say, about 40% of the people will come out and vote. That's fairly typical for an off-presidential election. If 60% of the American people do not vote, the assumption is that 70 to 80% of low-income people and of young people will not participate in this election. And as I've just heard in the last few moments, and I know you've been discussing all day long, the enormity of the issues facing young people, facing people of color, facing working people, facing low-income people, and the vast majority of those folks are not going to participate in the election. And then there's another reality for November 2014, and that is that as a result of Citizens United and McCutcheon, the billionaire class now has the capability of spending unlimited sums of money. And I cannot impress upon you enough what unlimited means, because many of you just don't know what unlimited means. The Koch brothers, you know, have been really devastated by the oppressive socialistic regime of Barack Obama, who has strangled the economy, made it really hard for people to make a buck. But in the midst of that, just last year, the Koch brothers saw their wealth go from $68 billion to $80 billion under the difficult restrictions of the Obama administration. And I want you just to take a deep thought about this. $12 billion increase in wealth in 1 year. They're now the second wealthiest family in America. And these people are prepared to spend as much as it takes. Obama and Romney in the last election spent a bit over $1 billion, getting money from, you know, every source, a bit over $1 billion. For these guys to spend $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion is like you going out for lunch. It is chump change. It is a fraction of what they increased in wealth in the last year. So the dynamics of American democracy today is that the vast majority of the people don't vote. Lower income and working class people in very large numbers don't vote. And the billionaire class is in the process of buying and selling politicians. That's where we are today. Now, I want to tell you something else which is important to know. And that is that the Koch brothers and others, not just them, but I think they've been pretty central to this whole issue, have been enormously successful in the last many, many decades. They've been at this for a long, long time in creating an America or a vision of America which works well for billionaires but is a disaster for the middle class and working families. And it is amazing how little this story is covered in the corporate media. But I want to take a few minutes, if I might, to tell you about a very interesting document that a staffer of mine discovered. In 1980, David Koch ran for Vice President of the United States and helped fund the campaign of the Libertarian Party in that year. And that's fine. Everyone has a right to run for office. And in that year, they developed a platform. The platform that they ran on in 1980 was thought by most people to be really kooky, extreme, way, way out there. And they ended up getting 1% of the vote. The document that I'm going to read to you now, I want you to hear what I'm saying, because their extraordinary success in transforming politics in America is that ideas 34 years ago that were thought to be extreme and crazy, they ran against Ronald Reagan because he was too liberal. all right? The ideas that were 34 years ago thought to be extreme and crazy are now, by and large, mainstream Republican Party ideas. Now, the media often writes about Koch brothers are spending a lot of money, Harry Reid disagrees with the Koch. They write all these articles. You know what they forget to tell us? They forget to tell us, and I don't think it's an accident, what do these guys stand for? All right, it is one thing that all of us should be concerned about it, that anybody spends hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in an election. I think that's bad no matter what your views are, to tell you the truth. We don't want to see billionaires competing, in elections. What do these guys stand for? I will read you segments, some, word for word, of the 1980 document, and here's the point. I do not believe they have changed their views. So let me read. Give me about 2 minutes here to read some of the segments of this. First one, quote, this is exact quotes from their platform, quote, "We urge the repeal of federal campaign finance laws and the immediate abolition of the despotic Federal Election Commission." What does that mean in English? What it means is Citizens United. It means McCutcheon, and if you read the last McCutcheon opinion of Clarence Thomas, if you listen to the head of the NRC now, Mr. Priebus, you know what they believe? That Citizens United did not go far enough. That it is really oppressive and a denial of freedom to the Koch brothers and others that they cannot directly give you $50 million for your campaign. Now they have to do it through independent expenditures. So they talked about this 34 years ago, today, mainstream Republican. Quote, "We favor the abolition of Medicare and Medicaid programs." Well, that hasn't happened. But if you look at the Ryan budget, what do you know? Medicare is being transformed, if they had their way, into a voucher program. You're old and you're sick, we're going to give you $8,000 to take care of your cancer problem, and you can go to any private insurance you want. And think about all those private insurance companies are going to want your business, right? Okay. In terms of Medicaid, they haven't abolished it. Look at the Ryan budget. Savage cuts in Medicaid. Quote, "We favor the repeal of the fraudulent, virtually bankrupt, and increasingly oppressive Social Security system." No, they haven't done that. What did Bush try to do a few years ago? That's right. So that idea, which 34 years ago was thought to be totally insane, was now pushed by a Republican president, and you got many, many people, Republicans in the Senate, who believe that. They may not speak about it every day, but they do. "We propose," quote, "we propose the abolition of the governmental postal service," end quote. It's an issue I've been heavily involved in. But you got Republicans who want to decimate the postal service today, no question about that. Now, listen to this one. This is where these guys are coming from. You read about the attacks on the IRS all the time and how the IRS this, the IRS. Quote, "We support the eventual repeal of all taxation." It's a modest proposal. It simply means ending government. Nothing significant about that. That's all that it means. Now, all of you are aware that we're fighting to raise the minimum wage. 1010 to me is a modest proposal. I would go higher than that, but it will be a significant help to 25, 30 million Americans who will get a pay raise. This is their view on that. Quote, "We support repeal of all law which impede the ability of any person to find employment, such as minimum wage laws." And today, what I can tell you, most people don't know this. They say, well, Republicans are not supporting an increase in the minimum wage. What you should know is that many, many, many Republicans agree with that right now, and they are upfront about it. It's not a question of raising the minimum wage. It's repealing the minimum wage so that an employer in a high unemployment town, city, can hire you for $3 or $4 an hour. That's what they were talking about 30-plus years ago, and we're seeing that discussion becoming mainstream right now. Quote, "We advocate the complete separation of education and state. Government schools lead to the indoctrination of children and interfere with the free choice of individuals. Government ownership, operation, regulation, and subsidy of schools and colleges should be ended." What does that mean? The ending of public education in America, the ending of state colleges and state universities, and moving strictly to private schools. We condemn, quote, we condemn compulsory education laws, and we call for the immediate repeal of such laws. You know what that means? Kids are back working in McDonald's and Walmart at the age of 14 or 15. That's what that means. Now, needless to say, for the Kochs who are in the fossil fuel industry, it's not surprising that they said, quote, we support the abolition of the Environmental Protection Agency. Last point, quote, now I want you to hear this thoroughly because this is their philosophy, and this is a philosophy that has permeated right through the Republican Party. Quote, we oppose all government welfare, relief projects, and aid to the poor programs. All these government programs are privacy invading, paternalistic, demeaning, and inefficient. Here's the key phrase. The proper source of help for such persons, majority of Americans, is the voluntary efforts of private groups and individuals. That means goodbye food stamps, goodbye Head Start, goodbye unemployment insurance, goodbye every piece of legislation passed in the last 80 years to protect working families, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. In other words, if you are hurting, the way you get help is to go to some charity or some church, and maybe if somebody is nice to you, they may give you some help. That is their view of society. Now, the bad news is that this philosophy, because of the enormous wealth of the Koch brothers, and what they do, and you got to give them credit, they are very, very smart. What they do is not just put money into campaigns, and they're going to do that. They have, over the years, set up and supported many, many think tanks and organizations. So when you come to Congress and you hold a hearing, as often as not, and it happens to me all the time, what's the issue? It's health care. We got somebody there in an organization funded by the Koch brothers to tell you why it's a great idea to end Medicare or Medicaid. You got somebody there in education who tells you why public schools are really bad and we should not go forward to help students who are deeply indebted or expand Pell Grants. You got people who are dealing with veterans issues who come up and give you a right-wing perspective on that. You name the issue, and they are there. And their goal is to, in a certain significant way, to transform American society to back where we were in the 1920s, where a handful of very wealthy people and corporations controlled the economic and political life of the nation. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that this philosophy maybe reflects 5%, at most 10% of the American people. But because of the money that they have and their ability to parse words and to do very good work in communications, they now control the House of Representatives and stand the shot to control the U.S. Senate. Now, let me say a word, and I'll try to be, it's not as scary as all this. To talk a little bit about what is going on in our country today. And in one sentence, economically, what's going on in this country is the middle class is disappearing. We have more people living in poverty today than ever before in the history of the country, while the people on top are doing phenomenally well. Since 1999, you want to know why people are angry? Typical American family, a family right in the middle, has seen its income go down since 1999 by more than $5,000 after adjusting for inflation. Typical male workers today make $283 less than they did 44 years ago. What about that? In terms of inflation accounted for dollars. So you got millions of people working longer hours for lower wages. 44 making less money than they made 44 years ago, despite the huge increase in productivity, which means they're producing a lot more. Typical female workers earned $1,700 less last year than they did in 2007. Now, when you talk about American society, and I see this all the time, and I travel a lot, I'm going to be on a plane in a little while, go through airports, you see people are stressed out, people are frightened, and one of the reasons for that, and this is unbelievable, half of all Americans have less than $10,000 in their savings account. Right? Doesn't shock you, but you know what that means. That means you are an illness away from financial disaster. That means you're an automobile accident away from disaster. It means you're a divorce away from disaster. She's got millions of people, many of them getting older. They're figuring, how are they going to retire? Can they make it just on Social Security? And what they have is less than $10,000 in the bank. Today, you got some 7 million young people who either dropped out of high school or graduated high school. You know what they're doing? Not much. They don't have any jobs and they're not in school. And many of them are doing self-destructive activity, doing drugs and so forth. And that is one of the reasons why we in our country have the dubious distinction of having more people in jail than any other country on earth. So instead of investing in our kids and our young people and in jobs, we're investing in jails. That makes no sense to me at all. When you talk about why people are angry and you talk about the decline of the middle class, understand that as a result of disastrous trade policies, NAFTA, CAFTA, unfettered free trade with China. In the last 15 years of this country, we have lost over 50,000 factories and millions of good-paying jobs. Young people don't know that there was once a time in American history where you could buy a product that was actually made in the United States and not in China. And what we have got to do is once again make products in the United States of America. Not so many years ago, the largest employer in America was General Motors. Union, strong union, decent wages, decent benefits. Today, the largest private sector employer is low wages, anti-unionism, anti-union, and minimal benefits. And by the way, Walmart is owned by the Walton family, the wealthiest family in America, and I'm sure you're all delighted that because of their low wages and minimal benefits, many of their workers are on Medicaid or on food stamps or in government-subsidized housing that you pay for. So on behalf of the Walton family, I want to thank you very much for helping them increase their $140 billion. They appreciate it very, very much. And here's another issue of huge consequence. 30 years ago, in the United States, we led the world in terms of the percentage of people who had college degrees. We were the best educated country in the world. Today, we are in 15th place in terms of the percentage of our people that go to college. So where we are at right now is not only a collapsing middle class, but people on the top doing phenomenally well. So let me bore you with a few statistics. Top 1% of America owns 38% of the financial wealth of America. Who wants to guess what the bottom 60% own? What's the guess? No, 2.3%. All right? Top 1% owns 38% of the financial wealth. Bottom 60% owns 2.3%. The Walton family, our good friends that you are helping to subsidize, own more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Sheldon Adelson, who is also interested in running his own primaries, has a net worth today of $38 billion, up $11.5 billion last year. Now that's wealth. That's what people accumulate in their lifetime. In terms of income, which is what you made last year, you'd all be happy to know that since the Wall Street crash, 95% of all new income goes to the top 1%. Okay? So in that sense, when you talk about economic growth, it doesn't mean a whole lot if almost all of that growth goes to the top 1%. Top 25 hedge fund managers made more than $24 billion last year. That is the equivalent of the full salaries of more than 425,000 public school teachers. Oh, we just can't afford public education. So you got 25 hedge fund managers making the equivalent of over 400,000 public school teachers. Now, in terms of taxes, what you should be aware is that 1 out of 4 Corporations in America pays less in taxes than most of you. They pay nothing. Over the past 5 years, profitable corporations like General Electric, Boeing, and Verizon paid nothing in federal income taxes, even though those companies made a combined profit of $78 billion. All right, that is the reality of what's going on in America. The rich get richer, the middle class disappears. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. And if we do not get our act together, we are in serious danger of moving from a democratic society to an oligarchic form of society. All right? What do we have to do? Briefly. Number one, real unemployment is not 6.3%, it is close to 12%, counting people giving up looking for work, people working part-time when they want to work full-time. Do you know what every single poll tells us is the major priority for the American people? It is a four-letter word called jobs. So what do we have to do? Immediately, we need a massive jobs program to put millions of people back to work. Easiest way to do it is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. Do that, we put millions of people back to work, make the country more productive. Wages. I think raising the minimum wage, given the fact that most of the new jobs being created are low-wage and part-time jobs, we need to raise the minimum wage. I applaud the people in Seattle, Washington, for putting a target of $15 an hour. That's where we've got to go. We've got to start off by passing at least 1010 in the Congress as soon as possible. We've got to deal with the issues of pay equity. Not acceptable that women earn 77 cents for what men earn. Education, huge issue. We're not going to move forward in a society as a society unless we deal with a crisis in childcare. In my state, all over America, you got working families. They do not know where to send their kids in terms of affordable quality childcare. We can create a huge numbers of jobs doing that. In terms of college, we have to ask ourselves this question. I want to go through the whole issue of the deep debt that people find themselves in. We are competing against countries that are a lot smaller than we are. You know what they do in Scandinavia? You know what they do in France? They say that they want their best, they want their young people to be able to get the best education they can without cost. Without cost. God, you know, the idea that we have free public education through high school, that's an antiquated concept. People need a college degree. Everybody in this country who has the ability and the desire should be able to get that education regardless of their income. Bob, in his very kind introduction, talked about Social Security. And this is an issue, God, that we work on that. We work with Bob. We work with the senior groups. We work with the unions. We work with disability groups, women's groups, the veterans organizations. What you saw in the effort to destroy Social Security is what you see all of the time. Mistruths, mistruths, and mistruths. How many times did you hear people on television saying, well, Bob, we all know Social Security is going broke and that it has to be reformed? We've heard that a million times. Well, guess what? Social Security has $2.6 trillion in its trust fund, can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 19 years. And if you lift that absurd cap, which is now at $119,000, we can not only extend significantly the life of Social Security, we can increase Social Security benefits, which is exactly what we want to do. Now, here is, in a difficult political time, here is a piece of very good news. 2.5 years ago, we had virtually every Republican talking about entitlement reform, which, as you know, means cuts in Social Security. We had a number of Democrats saying the same thing. And guess what? We had the President of the United States. We had Bold Simpson. We had everybody on the media talking about how you had to cut Social Security. All these millionaire guys talking about it. And you know what happened? Some of us came together in the Senate, and some of us came together in the House, and we worked with organizations all over America who began to stand up in large numbers. And you know what happened? Today, there is nobody on Capitol Hill talking about cutting Social Security. There's another issue of huge concern that creates, I think, some strange bedfellows, and that is the issue of constitutional rights and civil liberties. Back after 9/11, I was in the House, and I was one of the relatively few to vote against the USA Patriot Act. And then I voted against the reauthorization of the USA Patriot Act. So what's the story? Should we defend ourselves against terrorism? The answer is yes. But can we do it in a way that does not undermine the constitutional rights of the American people? I believe from the bottom of my heart we can do that. The idea that the United States government has files about every phone call that you made is beyond disgraceful. So we do not want the United States government, we do not want private corporations to be going into our phone calls, into our websites, into our emails. And we got to stand up and say, if this is a free country, stay out of our phone calls, stay out of our emails, stay out of our websites. Let me conclude on this note. My wife always tells me that after I speak, we have to hand out Prozac at the door, because I've thoroughly, my wife is right here, and says I depress everybody so much, half the people leave are suicidal and everything. But let me end on this note. This country has had a long and wild ride since its inception. All right? If you read documents like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, given the fact that they were written in the late 18th century, they're really extraordinary documents, and we owe a lot to those people. Jefferson and Madison and those guys were nobody's fools. We also know that when those documents were written, we had slavery in America. We had a situation where women were not second-class citizens, were third-class citizens. And where in a so-called free society, it wasn't just blacks and women who couldn't vote, it was men who did not own property, right? So what has been the struggle? What has been the struggle to today? The struggle has been for rights, for dignity, to create a more democratic and just society. That's been the struggle. And God knows, you all know, how many people fought and died in the trade union movement for the rights of workers to organize, to have a 40-hour work week. How many women gave up their lives, not just so that women can vote, but women could have an equal place at the table in all aspects of our lives. And what we have seen in recent years, for example, is a revolution in terms of gay rights. And I'm very proud that my state has been one of the leaders in that effort. The point being, is that we have our ups and we have our downs. And I think in many ways, we should be proud. If Bob and I were chatting 20 years ago, and we knew each other 20 years ago, and we were saying, I think in 2008, this country will elect an African-American as president of the United States, we would not have said that, and re-elect him. That is a huge step forward in overcoming racism. So this country has made many, many important strides forward in becoming a less discriminatory society. And we should be proud of ourselves for that. Clearly, where we have failed is on the economic area, which is perhaps the most important. And today, so few have so much, and so many have so little. So I conclude by urging you and begging you not to turn your backs on the political process. Now, more than ever, we need people educating other people. We need people organizing in a way that we have never done before. I will promise you this, just in this one election, and we've got to go beyond that. If we were to raise the voter turnout from 40 to 45%, Republicans will not take control over the Senate. Absolutely. Just that. In Denmark, where political consciousness is a lot higher than it is in our country, their last election, if I'm not mistaken, 89% of their people voted. 89%. By the way, their election was 3 weeks, and there were no TV ads. Not bad. All right. So what am I saying? What our job is to do exactly what the Koch brothers are doing, except we don't have billions of dollars behind us. They are also trying to shape political consciousness. And that's what they do, and they spend huge amounts of money every day, and that's what our job is. What we have going for us that they don't have going for them is the overwhelming majority of the American people agree with virtually everything that I said and everything that you believe in. We have the people on our side. There is, in my view, I do not and never have accepted this red state, blue state business. I don't believe it for a moment. I don't believe it for a moment. There is no state in this country where a majority of people believe that we give tax breaks to billionaires and cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. No state. And our job is to educate and organize in 50 states in this country, not concede any state. So the stakes are enormously high. I mean, really what we are fighting for is whether or not the middle class survives, whether or not we retain our democratic structure of government, or we evolve to an economic and political oligarchy. You guys have been there. I look around, and I know some of you. I know you've been doing it for a long, long time. Now is not the time to turn our backs on the struggle. Now is the time to redouble our efforts. And thank you all very much for what you have done. I've got a plane to catch, but Bob has requested that I take a few questions, and I'd be happy to do that. Ma'am?
Yes, I was a bit disappointed that you didn't talk about corporations are not people and money is not speech. It's a constitutional amendment that millions of people have already signed and passed referendums in 16, 17
That's
states
right.
so far. We are demanding that Congress pass that.
I apologize. You're right. In fact, you know, I wanted to give you guys a break and shorten the speech a little bit. Look, there's no issue when I talked about the Koch brothers and their friends being able to buy elections. What we have got to do, and I am working with people like Tom Udall from New Mexico, and here's the good news on that one. I have a constitutional amendment on this issue. There are others. We're going to bring forth a united constitutional amendment. It's going to get to the floor of the United States Senate within a couple of months. You are right. We got about 16 states, including Vermont, on record, is wanting a constitutional amendment. We have hundreds and hundreds of communities all over America. I beg of you, organize and educate around this issue, because you know what? Even honest conservatives understand that billionaires buying elections is not what American democracy is supposed to be about. So I consider that to be an enormously important issue. We're going to be working really hard on that constitutional amendment.
Senator, I want to thank you for your service to the people, and I want to ask you one question. When will we see an indictment against people like Hank Greenberg, Melvin Blankfein, and Jamie Dimon?
Good question. You know, there is almost no place that I go where somebody doesn't ask me that question. And you know why? Because people understand that the crooks on Wall Street, please quote me accurately, I said crooks on Wall Street. I don't want to be misquoted on that. A place where the business model is fraud, where their recklessness, where their greed and their illegal behavior has caused so much pain for so many people in this country and around the world. And people ask, they say, you know what, kids are in jail for, you know, doing drugs, and somebody's in jail for burglary. What about these guys and their crimes? You may remember last year, the Attorney General, first an underling of his, and then he, was asked this question in Congress. And he said something to the effect, I don't want to misquote him, but he said something to the effect, well, you know, if we arrest these people, it could destabilize the financial industry. It's true. In other words, he later backtracked on that. But in other words, what he was saying is these people are not only too big to fail, that they have to be bailed out, and I voted against that bailout, by the way. Not only are they too big to fail, they are too big to jail. So I agree with you. Okay, maybe one last question if there is one. Yes. Right here.
Yeah, I have been here the whole day, but what I'm hearing is people talking about the value of dollars is in terms of monetary value. There's very little talk about principles and justice. And I think we have to begin from the changing the system. We have to have educational program to teach children from the beginning how to respect the moral value and true principles, and how to measure the cost effectiveness rather than listen to the propaganda of Koch brothers or somebody, maybe even Democrat.
Right.
So can we do something of this sort of this effort?
Well, you know, you're right. And again, like everything else, these things are not so easy. One of the things, let me start off, before we even talk about justice, you know, when I was growing up in school, you know, we had courses in civics. We learned about what democracy, what government did. There was a poll that came out last year, Mammoth University. 63% of the American people could not name the parties that controlled the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. I doubt that the majority of people know who the member of Congress is. How do you bring about change when you have that low level of political consciousness? But your point is, you know, we have got to educate people about justice and struggle and human dignity and ending prejudice. We obviously and absolutely have got to do that. All right, let me run to the airport now so I don't miss my plane. But look, again, you guys have been there, are there now, and Bob and Roger and the campaign here. Thank you for what you do, and thank you all very, very much for everything you do. Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming, too. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. We are going to take a break. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. Stand up, relax, take a break.